One of the things we strive for on our homestead is self-reliance, especially when it comes to food. We try to limit the things we buy in grocery stores if at all possible. We have laying hens for fresh eggs. We're raising our own meat birds for fresh poultry. We source our beef and pork from local farmers. And we try to grow most of our own vegetables and fruits. Most of the time, our hard work pays off. But everything doesn't always go according to plan. Sometimes we fail. Yet even in the midst of failure, we remember that failure is the foundation of success.
Good morning, YouTube family. Welcome back to the Southern Homestead. If you're new here, my name is Tammy. Today we're just going to be going about our day, probably going to make some beef bone broth. I have to pick a few things in the garden. I'm also going to share with you one, maybe two of our fails here on the homestead. Not everything comes up roses around here. We certainly have our issues, and I'm going to share at least one of those with you today. Okay, so slight change of plans. The heat has driven me from the garden, and not because I was too hot, although it was very hot, but my camera would not film because of the extreme temperatures. So the camera shut down and basically said, get inside. So here I am. And I'm gonna go ahead and continue with what I had planned for the rest of the day. And maybe this evening I'll be able to get back out into the garden and finish harvesting potatoes. I only harvested one or two plants, and to be quite honest, they didn't look that great. Although we did get some potatoes from the first plant I harvested, and then there are potatoes on these couple of plants that I attempted to harvest this morning. They're not very big. So, we'll just have to wait and see what they look like in the row crops when I decide to harvest those. Okay, so we're gonna shift gears today, and I'm gonna go ahead and start with my beef bone broth. And the first thing I've done is I've lined my trays with the bones. Now, they were still frozen, so I'm having to do them in batches. I have 2 trays already in the oven, and I'm gonna go ahead and prepare a third tray. And then, I'm gonna cycle through and get them all roasted. And then we're gonna go ahead and proceed with the next steps. My first batch is ready to come out of the oven, and I'll show you what they look like after they've been roasted. So here's what they look like after they've been roasted, and they're gonna go straight into my roaster pan over here with all the other goodies that I'm gonna show you. So now that I have my second batch in the oven, the first batch has been placed into the roaster, and I'm gonna add the rest of the goodies and get my broth started cooking. So if you'll remember, if you followed me for any amount of time, you know that I save all of my veggie scraps, and that's gonna be all of my onion peels, garlic peels, carrot ends, celery ends, and the celery leaves, and the ends of green onions, and all of those things. And so I keep them in a Ziploc bag in the freezer. And usually when I get 2 bags full, that's when I decide I'm gonna go ahead and make some broth. Today it just so happens to be some beef bone broth. And I needed to make room in the freezer since it's harvest season and a lot of our vegetables are going into the freezer for now. I had to make room. So I pulled all the beef bones that I could out of the freezer to go ahead and start my broth. And what I have here is a bag of the veggie scraps that I pulled out of the freezer. I have another bag over here, but I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna use 2 roasters. So I'm gonna have 2 batches going at the same time. And the key to a good bone broth is low and slow. This is gonna cook for a minimum of 24 to 36 hours. And that's gonna give us that nice gelatinous bone broth that we're looking for. So I'm gonna go ahead and add the veggies to the roaster. I'm also going to zip out to the herb garden very quickly because it's so hot. and grab some fresh herbs to go in there with. So I've just come back from the herb garden, and I'm gonna go ahead and put some fresh herbs into my bone broth. And what I have going in, I'll let you know, is some fresh sage. I'm not gonna worry about stems because none of that is gonna end up in my broth. So I'm not pulling leaves off or anything. I've got some fresh thyme, oregano, basil, fresh parsley, and fresh rosemary. And then I'm gonna put enough water in to not quite cover it. I don't wanna dilute my bone broth. I want a nice rich bone broth, but I do need to add some water. Now I'm just gonna add some salt and pepper. And that's it. We're gonna go ahead and cover that up. And that's gonna cook for at least 36 hours. Okay, so I almost forgot one final ingredient, a splash of apple cider vinegar. Now this is crucial, not necessary, but crucial if you wanna make sure you're extracting all of the collagen from the bones. This is gonna help break those bones down. So my second batch of bones has come out of the oven. And I'm just adding them to the stock pot. And I'm gonna do the same thing I did for the first batch. I'm going to add another gallon of my veggie scraps directly into the pot. It's getting kind of full in here. I probably should have done 3 batches. I'm gonna add enough water just to barely cover the meat portion, not as high up as it is here, just because most of these are the veggies on top. And again, I don't wanna add too much water and dilute my bone broth. I'm gonna add the rest of my herbs to the stock pot. I'm gonna season with salt and pepper, a splash of apple cider vinegar, and then the lid goes on. And again, this is gonna slowly cook over the next 36 hours. Before I move on to the next task at hand, I thought you'd like to see what a true homesteader's kitchen looks like. As you can see behind me, anytime you're making anything from scratch, there's always going to be piles of dishes to deal with. A lot of the times I wash by hand. Today is no exception. So I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go ahead and clean these dishes up, and then I'll start my next project. All right, so I am done cleaning the kitchen and I'm ready to move on to my next project. And that is just gonna be making some more crackers for the household. We love to have sourdough crackers on hand to eat with soups and stews, even in the summer, because I'm always cooking soups and stews. Now, I already have a video that I put out several months back on how to make these sourdough crackers from start to finish, and I'll try to remember to link that for you right up here. But meanwhile, I'm gonna go ahead and show you a little bit of the process while I'm working today in the kitchen. All right, so 1 batch done, 4 more to go. These crackers are a staple in our household. I am taking a sneak peek at my beef bone broth, and it already looks and smells amazing. So this is what it looks like so far, and it's only been a couple of hours. Look at that beautiful rich color. So while the crackers are baking in the oven and my beef bone broth is just chugging away in the roaster and on the stove, I'm gonna go ahead and get my bread whipped up. I usually do a bulk baking day once a week. This isn't quite a bulk baking day, but I am doing lots of baking with the crackers and then now the sandwich bread. Pretty sure I've already shared that sandwich bread recipe with you and how to make it. I'll try to remember to leave the link down in the description box below for you to refer to. So I've already got my water and honey and yeast into the mixing bowl. So I'm gonna go ahead and proceed with the rest of the ingredients. I've got my softened butter, a little bit of salt. I'm gonna need a cup of sourdough starter. And I'm gonna go ahead and add my flour to the mixing bowl. and then get my dough to start kneading. So my dough is finished kneading, and I'm gonna go ahead and let it rise for about an hour to an hour and a half, just until it's doubled in size. Normally I would put this in my oven with the light on, but because I've been baking the crackers, the oven is kind of hot. Not to mention, it just needs to be in a nice warm spot, and that's pretty much anywhere in my kitchen right now. It's hot in here. It's hot outside and it's hot inside. So good morning. It is now the next day, and I'm gonna finish up my tasks. And one of those is I'm going to be doing a second round of sweet corn. Unfortunately, our corn that we planted did not do well at all. You know, I think we're partly to blame. We decided to try using some old seeds, and you know, we took a gamble and we lost. Needless to say, we are gonna plant a second round. We live in South Central Mississippi, Zone 8B, and we have a very long growing season. So I have plenty of time to get another batch of corn in the ground. So this bed right here in front of me, this is, if you remember, this is the bed of garlic, which is no longer, thanks to my free-range chickens. So there's a couple of weeds popping up here and there, and the loofah plant has decided to, instead of going up the trellis, now the loofah plant is making its way this way. I'm gonna reroute the loofah plant back up the trellis and scoop off some of this mulch, and this is where I'm gonna plant my second round of corn.
Living the best life among the trees, life on the homestead, oh so free. Roaming the land that we created, life on the homestead, finally made it. We're living the life we dreamed of, full of life and full of love. Whoa, no more 9 to 5 when you're living between the pines. No more struggling to get by when you're living in God's light. Whoa, that's the homestead life. No more 9 to 5 when you're living between the pines. No more struggling to get by when you're living in God's light. Whoa, that's
Okay, that only took about 15 minutes to put in the ground, and I am drenched in sweat. So I think it's time to go inside. While I'm out here, I'm just checking on the garden, and it's almost time to harvest some eggplants. The echinacea is in full bloom, and the pollinators are just loving it. And of course, my zinnias look amazing. I think they're probably my favorite flower to plant. The asparagus is doing quite well. We could not harvest this year because these are second year crowns. So next year we should be able to harvest a little bit. And look, a volunteer corn plant. Now where did that come from? My sunflowers are looking great. And we're gonna harvest some of those heads off of the stalks and dry out for seeds. And we'll leave the rest to dry out on the stalk and then hopefully self-seed, and then we'll get more sunflowers next year. Last week I was telling you about the trouble we were having with our zucchini and squash, and there's our very first zucchini that I'm gonna harvest today. But before I head in, I'm gonna take care of a few weeds that are growing up in my path here in between my raised beds. And of course we don't use any kind of chemicals. We would never use Roundup on the property. We're gonna make a homemade concoction of vinegar, Epsom salt, and some dish detergent. And I'll share that recipe with you on the screen. and it makes up a gallon at a time. I'm sure you could double it or quadruple it, whatever you need, but I should only need about a gallon. Okay, so that about does it, and I'm gonna head inside and finish the rest of my task for today. So, thankfully, back inside for the rest of the day, I am going to be finishing up my beef bone broth that I started early yesterday morning, and I'm gonna go ahead and get that into the jars and into the pressure canner to make it shelf stable. Before I get to the canning of my bone broth, there is one other task that I have to get done. It's kind of one of those tedious, mundane tasks, but since we try to make most things ourselves and not buy processed foods from the store, then it has to be done. And that is making homemade mayo. I've already showed you this process in a previous video, but I will go ahead and film this for you, and I'm not going to do any editing. I'm going to show you just how fast it is to make homemade mayo. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need is a cup of avocado oil or olive oil. I prefer the taste of avocado oil in my homemade mayo, so that's what I use. Next, we're gonna want a fresh egg. The fresher the better. That's gonna help your mayo last long in the refrigerator. And I just pulled this from the hen house this morning. Next, we need a dash of salt, a splash of apple cider vinegar, and a little squirt of yellow mustard. You could use Dijon if you want. I just don't have any. So, and now we blend. And that, my friends, is how long it took me to make homemade mayo. Honestly, I think it took me longer to pull the ingredients out and to gather the egg than it did to actually make this mayo. Part of the reason homesteaders are so busy all the time, I know, because I am one of them, is because we try to do as much as we can for ourselves without relying on outside systems, and that's gonna mean making things from scratch. I know for many years when young in my marriage, it was so convenient to just go to the store and purchase everything. It was fast and easy, and you know, let's face it, a lot of that processed crap is pretty inexpensive. It costs a lot to eat healthy, not just money, but it costs a lot of time as well. But in the end, it is well worth the effort, the time, and maybe the little added expense to be able to eat healthy. I did manage to finish my crackers yesterday and got us stocked up for the next week and a half or so. And Michael was pretty happy about that. The bread also got baked. I ended up with a small loaf of sandwich bread and then several rolls. And then we take some of those rolls and we put them in the freezer. There's just the two of us here, and we don't eat bread every day, and we don't want it to get moldy or go to waste. My beef bone broth is ready to strain. And I'm gonna start first by pulling out a lot of the big pieces and bones, and then I'm gonna pour it through a colander that's been lined with a tea towel. You could use a cheesecloth, that would work as well. I'm also gonna go ahead and strain the roaster and get that into the big stock pot as well. And then I'll be ready to jar it up and put it in the pressure canner. Now I'm ready for the easy part. Yes, you got that. Easy part. The easiest part about making homemade beef bone broth is going to be the canning process. Everything else that you've seen me do so far takes a very long time. It's hands-on when you're trying to strain it and get all the bones and the pieces of veggies out and all of that. That's very hands-on, very tedious. This part, very easy. I'm just gonna fill my jars, place them into the canner, and then let the canner do the work. It doesn't get any more simpler than that. Don't let the fear of canning prevent you from learning how to preserve your own foods. All right, so here we go. So I'm filling these jars to a 1-inch headspace. These are quart-sized jars, and we're gonna process them for 25 minutes in the pressure canner. And for my elevation, that's gonna be 10 pounds pressure. If your bone broth has a lot of fat in it, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you're gonna wanna skim some of it off before you actually process the jars, because all that extra fat, if you have any kind of siphoning whatsoever in the canner, then that fat content that's in that broth is going to prevent your lids from forming a good seal. I do have some fat in this broth, and I have skimmed off most of it, not all of it. I love the flavor that it adds to the broth, so I'm going to keep some of it in the jars, but I have skimmed off a lot of it, and then I re-topped them off to that 1-inch headspace. Now it's time to clean the rims. And I am going to use vinegar for this because of the high fat content. Now we're ready to put the jars into the canner. Remember the rule: hot product, hot jars, hot canner. Once the steam is coming through the vent very solidly and no broken streams, then we're going to set our timer for 10 minutes, let it vent for 10 minutes, and then we'll be ready to put our weight on. So my canner finished the venting cycle. I placed my weight at 10 pounds pressure and then brought it up to pressure. And once it hit that pressure mark, then I was able to set my timer for 25 minutes. My broth is finally ready to come out of the canner. Now, what I normally do is when the timer goes off, I turn the burner off and I leave it sit until it comes down to pressure on its own. So when the dial hits 0, then I know it's down to 0 pressure. At that point, I still don't open the canner. I take the weight off of the little vent. After that, I set my timer for another 20 minutes or so for the rest of the pressure to come on out through the vent. After that 20 minutes is up, then I'm gonna go ahead and take the lid off. Then I set my timer again for another 15 minutes or so, just so the jars get acclimated. We don't want any sudden changes in temperature, or you're gonna have siphoning of your jars and you're gonna lose a lot of your liquids and possibly compromise the seals of the jars. So that being said, it's finally time and I can remove my jars from the canner. Well, friends, I have finished all of my beef bone broth, and as you can see here behind me, I have 11 quarts for the pantry shelf, and that's perfect because I am getting low on my stock. I think I only have 4 left from last year that I pressure canned, and so it was cutting it close. Now I also have done the chicken bone broth, and I'll try to leave that video for you here at the end. That way you can see exactly how to do chicken bone broth. I think that's going to do it for our video this week, friends. Thank you so much for joining me on the homestead, and I'll see you next time.